Everything you have ever been shown about ancient Egypt is wrong. Not partially wrong. Not wrong in the small, forgivable ways that history textbooks sometimes are. Fundamentally wrong. In color, in scale, in sound, in smell, and in the raw, overwhelming human force of it. You are standing on the west bank of the Nile. The year is 1250 BCE. The reign of Rameses. The Great is at its absolute thunderous apex. And the world surrounding you bears no resemblance to the bleached, eroded wreckage that tourists photograph today. The temple behind you is not gray stone. It is screaming in color. Crimson, burnished gold, a blue so electrically vivid it seems to vibrate at the edge of your vision, as though lit from within rather than painted from without. The air carries incense smoke, the iron-rich smell of Nile flood mud, the sweetness of sun-dried fish, and beneath all of it, something older and harder to name. The unmistakable scent of a civilization at the absolute height of its power and fully, terrifyingly aware of that fact. Nothing here looks the way you were taught. Nothing. At all. Today, through cutting-edge AI reconstruction and modern archaeology, we strip away 3,000 years of sand, silence, and assumption, and show you what ancient Egypt actually looked like when it breathed, when it roared. The historical anchor. Here is the single most important geographical truth about the civilization you are standing inside. Egypt was not a desert civilization. Say it again because it changes everything. Egypt was a river civilization wearing a desert disguise. Every year, between June and September, the Nile flooded with clockwork precision. When the waters pulled back, they left behind black alluvial silt so dense with minerals that a single season's planting could feed a city for a year. The Egyptians called this strip of living soil Kemet, the Black Land. It stretched barely 12 miles wide at its broadest. Beyond its edges lay the Deshret, the Red Land, a place without mercy, without water, without negotiation. Cinematic narrative. You're standing at the exact boundary between those two worlds. One sandaled foot in Kemet, one in Deshret. Feel the difference. The cool, giving softness of irrigated black earth behind you. The hard, unyielding heat of red stone ahead. Behind you, the valley assaults every sense at once. The thick green press of barley and emmer wheat. The rhythmic groan of Shaduf irrigation wheels lifting water from canal to field. The sound of oxen laboring through soft mud. Children shouting across a narrow channel. The hollow knock of a wooden hull against a wet dock. Ahead, absolute silence. A horizon containing nothing but heat shimmer and the patient geometry of red eternity. This was not landscape. This was cosmology made physical. The East Bank, where the sun climbed each morning, was the land of the living. Cities, markets, courts, workshops, all on the east. The West Bank, where the sun descended into darkness, held the tombs, the mortuary temples, the great necropolises carved into golden limestone cliffs. You could stand on a Theban rooftop and see both shores at once. Life and eternity, separated by nothing but the width of a river and the will to cross it. The AI/modern reveal. In 2021, researchers publishing in Communications Earth and Environment traced a buried paleo channel, a long-dead Nile branch sealed beneath meters of compacted desert, running directly alongside the Giza Plateau. The pyramids were not built in an isolated wilderness. They were constructed on the bank of a living river, deep enough to carry barges loaded with 2.5-ton limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura directly to the construction ramps. When you stand before the Great Pyramid today and feel the mystery of its isolation, you are responding to a landscape that did not exist when it was built. In 2500 BCE, you would have heard water lapping at dock pilings 30 meters from where you stand. The desolate, unreachable Egypt you were shown your entire life is a fiction written by geology and time. Egypt was loud. Egypt was wet. Egypt was chaotically, furiously alive. But if the land itself was nothing like history taught you, then who actually built all of this? The answer, buried beneath a hillside on the Theban West Bank, demolished the single greatest lie ever told about ancient Egypt. And it has been waiting in the sand this entire time. The historical anchor. The workers' village of Deir el-Medina, carved into a limestone valley on the Theban West Bank, is the most thoroughly documented community in the entire ancient world. Its residents, elite craftsmen who carved and painted the royal tombs of the Valley of the Kings, left behind thousands of ostraca, limestone flakes and pottery shards covered in ink, shopping lists, love poems, court depositions, furious complaints about neighbors. From these fragments, preserved by 3,000 years of dry desert air, we know their lives in detail, that is, at moments, startlingly intimate. Cinematic narrative. Step into the village. The alleys are barely the width of two people passing, but they press in with a density of life that is almost physical. Mud brick walls, whitewashed and sun-hot under your palm. Duck through a low doorway, a grinding stone worn hollow by generations before yours. A ceiling darkened with lamp smoke. The smell of fresh bread cutting through everything, like something clean and immediate. Across the lane, a man repairs a palm fiber sandal in thin shade. His neighbor argues loudly with a seated scribe, dictating a legal complaint for the village tribunal. Because in Deir el-Medina, ordinary craftsmen had full legal standing. A stonecutter could sue his foreman for unpaid rations. A widow could petition to clear a debt from her estate. A woman could initiate divorce and retain her property. And they did. Regularly, with considerable gusto. A cat materializes from behind a storage jar and presses its head against your ankle. Sacred to Bastet, yes, but also employed as ruthless hunters, keeping grain stores clear of the rats that could consume a year's supply in weeks. The meal on the table inside would stop you cold. Beer, thick, yeasty, nutritious, issued as part of every worker's official daily wage. Bread in over 30 documented varieties, salted Nile perch, garlic and leeks hanging from the ceiling beam, figs, pomegranates, honey sealed in a jar and traded at near sacred value. The AI/modern reveal. Skeletal analysis of remains from the Giza workers' cemetery has permanently demolished the image of pyramid builders as enslaved and disposable. Yes, the bones carry stress fractures from extreme physical labor, but they also show injuries professionally treated. Set fractures, surgical amputations followed by years of survival. Evidence of a state medical corps that would not be matched in the Western world for another 2,000 years. When that system failed its workers, they responded. In 1170 BCE, craftsmen of Deir el-Medina laid down their tools and marched on the administrative center at Thebes, chanting that their grain rations were 20 days overdue. The event was transcribed in full on the Turin strike papyrus, housed today in Turin's Museo Egizio, readable word for word. History's first recorded labor strike, 3,000 years before the concept had a name. Read that again. These people went on strike. They had rights, and someone wrote it down. But there was something else being constructed in Egypt, built with a geometric precision so extraordinary that AI imaging is only now beginning to expose what was deliberately concealed beneath the greatest religious complex in human history. And what it reveals changes the entire story. The historical anchor, Karnak. At its greatest extent, it covered 200 acres and represented 1,500 years of continuous construction under 30 successive pharaohs. At operational peak, it employed over 80,000 priests, craftsmen, and administrators. To contain its perimeter, you would need to demolish 18 full New York City blocks. It is the largest religious structure ever raised by human hands. And for most of recorded history, we had almost no accurate idea what it looked like from the inside at the height of its power. Cinematic narrative. You are at the threshold of the great hypostyle hall. Draw a breath before you step through, because your first breath inside is going to stop you. 134 columns rise in every direction, each more than 60 feet tall. Their surfaces carved in relief so dense, there is not a single inch of bare stone from floor to capital. Gods receiving offerings, pharaohs mid-strike, individual fingers carved with precision, hieroglyphic registers in deep ochre, chalk white, lapis turquoise, gold leaf, and a red so deep and ancient it feels older than the stone itself. But here is what no daylight photograph conveys. It is almost completely dark in here. The columns stand so close together that direct sunlight never reaches the floor. Light arrives in thin blades through clear story windows near the ceiling, descending through permanent haze from burning kyphi. A compound of 16 ingredients: honey, wine, raisins, pine resin, myrrh, combusted every dawn to ritually awaken the god in the inner sanctuary. The smoke settles on your skin and hair. Your voice, if you spoke, would return from the columns with a delay just long enough to feel like someone is speaking behind you in a language you almost recognize. You were not meant to feel welcome. You were meant to feel annihilated by scale. The AI/modern reveal. In 2023, a research team combining multispectral imaging with AI-assisted pigment analysis published the most complete digital reconstruction of the hypostyle hall ever produced. The lead researcher described the first full composite render as visually destabilizing. What visitors experience today as pale contemplative stone was at its peak, a sensory saturation so total and so deliberate that standing inside it felt less like entering a building and more like being swallowed by one. Simultaneously, ground-penetrating radar surveys beneath the Karnak precinct identified 3 subsurface anomalies consistent with sealed chambers, predating the New Kingdom structures above them by centuries. Their contents remain completely unknown. No excavation has reached them. They are sealed and waiting, and they have been waiting far longer than Egypt has been a memory. If the knowledge that sealed, unexplored chambers still lie beneath the greatest temple in human history makes something shift in your chest, type "lost forever" in the comments below. The incense fires in Karnak's inner sanctuary went cold sometime after 1170 BCE, and the silence that followed was not abandonment. It was an entire interconnected world simultaneously running out of everything it needed to survive. Because what ended this civilization was not an army, not a plague, and not a god. It was something happening to our planet right now, in real time. And the latest climate science has just confirmed exactly what it was. The historical anchor. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world ended. Not Egypt alone, everything simultaneously. The Hittite Empire, which had rivaled Egypt for 2 centuries, and formalized that rivalry in the Treaty of Kadesh, history's earliest surviving peace agreement, signed with Rameses II in 1259 BCE, collapsed so completely it vanished from human memory for 3,000 years. Mycenaean Greece went dark. The trading port of Ugarit burned and was never rebuilt. The palace complexes at Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae were destroyed within decades of each other. The entire Bronze Age network of copper, tin, grain, and correspondence failed inside a single human lifetime. Scholars call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. It remains the most complete civilizational implosion in recorded history. Cinematic narrative. You are a senior grain administrator in Rameses, the vast delta capital of 200,000 people, the most sophisticated city on Earth. You work in the generation after Ramesses II, under Ramesses III, and until recently, the machinery of state has run with the weight of something eternal. Then it doesn't. The tin caravans from the Anatolian highlands stop. No message, no delay notice. They simply stop. Then the cedar from Lebanon. Then the merchant letters from Ugarit go silent mid-conversation. The last letter in your archive ending in the middle of a transaction never completed. A colleague reports, voice low, that Ugarit has burned entirely. Palace, harbor, everything. You write it as unconfirmed. Then the sea peoples arrive. Wave after coordinated wave. Displaced Aegean and Anatolian populations driven southward by forces destroying every settled world they had known, strikes the Egyptian coastline with a ferocity that overwhelms ports from Canaan to the Delta. Ramesses III defeats them in a naval engagement at the Nile's mouth around 1175 BCE, carving the victory across the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu in magnificent, triumphant detail. He wins. Egypt survives. But the copper from Cyprus is gone. The tin from the east is gone. Without them, there is no bronze. Without bronze, there are no new temples, no new colossi. The pharaohs who follow build smaller things, and the gap between what Egypt was and what it is becoming widens silently with every passing reign. The AI/modern reveal. Isotopic analysis of sediment cores from lake beds across Cyprus, the Levant, and Anatolia, cross-referenced with pollen records and tree ring data, has assembled a climate portrait of devastating consequence. A severe multi-decade drought struck the entire eastern Mediterranean simultaneously, beginning precisely around 1200 BCE. Crop yields failed across multiple civilizations at once. The sea peoples were almost certainly not conquerors with territorial ambitions. They were millions of displaced, starving people walking toward any shore still showing green. What Egypt lost in those decades was not simply territory. It was irreplaceable human knowledge, medical traditions, engineering techniques, astronomical records, carried only in the hands and minds of specialists who did not survive. Accumulated over 2,000 years of unbroken civilization, gone in a generation. But what satellite imaging found buried beneath the Nile Delta is not just a lost temple or a forgotten tomb. It is an entire shadow civilization hiding in plain sight. And nobody had looked in the right direction until now. What AI pulled out of that data will make you question how much of the ancient world we have simply never thought to find. The historical anchor. In the last 15 years, a convergence of technologies has transformed what archaeological recovery means. LiDAR satellite mapping reads buried structures through meters of compacted desert. Multispectral imaging recovers paint invisible to human eyes for 3 millennia. Ground-penetrating radar maps subsurface anomalies without disturbing a grain of sand. And AI systems trained on thousands of excavation datasets can now identify buried site patterns in satellite data that no human analyst could detect alone. We are no longer simply excavating Egypt. We are rebuilding it. Cinematic narrative. Picture yourself beside archaeologist Dr. Sarah Parkak at her workstation at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. On her screen, a flat, sun-bleached expanse of the Nile Delta. To any eye, it is featureless. Blank ground, empty desert, doing what empty desert does. Nothing at all. She runs the AI enhancement algorithm against the infrared spectral bands in the satellite return data. The screen changes. From beneath the data, with the patient emergence of something that has been waiting for precisely this moment, a city materializes. A street grid, courtyard walls, a granary complex. The unmistakable axial symmetry of a temple precinct aligned to true cardinal directions. It was there the entire time, under the sand, under the sky, under 3,000 years of forgetting. Karnak's work has now identified over 3,000 previously unknown ancient Egyptian sites, 17 unrecorded pyramids, 109 undocumented tombs, entire settlements no archaeologist had ever mapped or knew to search for. They were there the whole time, waiting. The AI/modern reveal. AI colorization systems trained on spectral data from intact tomb paintings and pigment samples analyzed by X-ray fluorescence have produced color reconstructions of New Kingdom monuments at a fidelity unimaginable a decade ago. The twin colossi of Ramesses II at Luxor, pale and worn today, rendered back to their original state. Faces in warm living ochre, headdresses in gold leaf, hieroglyphic registers in alternating bands of color so dense and unrelenting that encountering them stops feeling like looking at architecture and starts feeling like being addressed across 3,000 years of silence. The sensation these reconstructions produce is specific and worth naming precisely. It is not quite wonder. It carries something of grief, but it is not that either. It is recognition. Egypt returned to its color and noise, and human scale is not alien, not remote, not safely distant. It is familiar in a way that is almost uncomfortable. These are people who took employers to court and kept cats and burned incense so their gods felt remembered and went on strike when wages were 3 weeks late. A civilization that ended not because it was incomprehensibly different, but because, in every way that carries weight, it was exactly like us. And that is either the most comforting thing you will hear today, or the most terrifying. 3,000 years ago, a woman ground grain on a stone worn hollow by her mother's hands before hers, listening through the wall to her neighbor argue about wages 20 days overdue. A priest climbed Karnak's steps before dawn and burned his morning offering in a hall so vast the smoke became its own weather. A pharaoh pressed his seal into wet clay with the complete certainty that what he was building would outlast everything that followed. He was right, and he was catastrophically wrong. The name survived. The world, the color and noise and weight of it, the heat pressing flat against your chest on the West Bank at dusk, was buried. Buried by sand and silence and the patient indifference of centuries that had other things to remember. But we are pulling it back. Every satellite pass, every radar survey, every AI render returning pigment to bare stone is a refusal to let what was lost remain lost. For the first time in human history, we are technically capable of answering what this world actually looked like. And the answer is more vivid, more human, and more unsettlingly familiar than 3,000 years of gray ruins ever allowed us to imagine. If that matters to you, subscribe to Forgotten Ages. Share this with someone who still thinks Egypt was silence and sand. The heat still finds you before your eyes adjust. Only now, you know what it has been holding, and that we are finally strong enough to take it back.